Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. February 24, 2022, exactly 3 years ago on this day, Putin dropped the first bombs on Ukraine and so began the war. 3 years and counting, the Russians have not let up and the Ukrainians face an uncertain future. Zelensky says he's ready to resign, but he has preconditions. Trump says he's not even a legitimate leader. The Europeans say they have a plan, but they're also rushing to Washington to win over Trump. And Vladimir Putin? He seems to be having the last laugh. Tonight, we'll tell you why this war is Putin's masterclass in strategic patience. Also, why Trump likes the Russian president. 6 theories that you don't want to miss. Meanwhile, in Germany, the election is done. Angela Merkel's party has won. Of course, she won't be the chancellor. It will be Friedrich Merz. We'll tell you all about him. In West Asia, Netanyahu threatens to start the Gaza war again. We'll tell you why. In Pakistan, the Prime Minister is set to lose his name. We are not making this up. In Bangladesh, an attack on an air base and the spread of anarchy. In Indonesia, the President launches a new wealth fund and faces protests. In India, the Finance Ministry releases details on USAID, and Elon Musk's email has triggered American government workers. He's asking them to list out what they did the last week or resign. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Iran summons Poland's envoy to Tehran over remarks made by Warsaw. Just days ago, the Polish foreign minister had criticized Iran and Russia and reportedly said that they had formed an axis of aggression. Tehran has called the comments biased and baseless. The European Union eases sanctions on Syria's energy, transport and banking sectors. It's a bit to help the war-torn country's reconstruction after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. But officials warn that the curbs could be reimposed if Syria's new leaders don't move towards democracy and respect its minorities. Another pro-Kurdish party mayor removed in eastern Turkey. He is the 10th mayor to be dismissed in less than a year. Ankara has stepped up pressure on pro-Kurdish movements while pursuing talks with the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party to end the decades-long conflict. Doctors Without Borders suspend operations in and around a famine-hit camp in Sudan. The international medical charity says it was forced to do so due to the escalating violence in North Darfur. The camp shelters more than 500,000 people displaced by the civil war. And a New Zealand minister resigns from his post for putting his hand on a staff member's upper arm. The minister says his conduct was quote-unquote overbearing. The resignation comes as Prime Minister Christopher Luxon's government lags in the polls. It has been 3 years. 3 years of war between Russia and Ukraine, 3 years of bullets, missiles and drones. It's been devastating and unrelenting. Let me show you what happened over the weekend. Russia launched its largest drone attack on Ukraine yet. It fired more than 250 drones. About half of them were shot down, but this has not slowed Russia's offensive. In the last 7 days, they've attacked Ukraine with more than 1,000 drones, more than 1,400 aerial bombs and 35 missiles of various types. Why this sudden escalation? Because Russia realizes it has the upper hand and it wants to secure its gains and set the pace for peace talks.
We are ready to negotiate with both Ukraine and Europe, with any representatives who in a spirit of goodwill would like to help achieve peace. But we will stop military operations only when these negotiations produce a firm, sustainable result that will be acceptable to the Russian Federation.
How is Zelensky responding to this? By hosting world leaders for a summit in Kyiv. This morning, a bunch of Western leaders arrived in Ukraine's capital, from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez to the EU President Ursula von der Leyen. At least 14 world leaders attended the summit in person. Another 20 joined virtually. It was a show of support. But it doesn't really help beyond a point, because increasingly Ukraine and its European allies are looking helpless. The US has virtually pulled support. Forget arms supplies. Donald Trump does not even recognize Zelensky as Ukraine's legitimate leader. He calls him a dictator. Trump is also bypassing both Ukraine and Europe. Last week, his team met the Russians directly. They began negotiations for a peace deal, just the Americans and the Russians. So after 3 years of war, Ukraine's position is the weakest it has ever been. But Zelensky is not giving up. Believe it or not, he is negotiating with the US. He says he is ready to step down, but on one condition. He wants NATO membership for Ukraine. That is the precondition for Zelensky's resignation.
If it's about peace in Ukraine, and you really want me to leave my position, I am ready to do that, in exchange for peace. Secondly, I can exchange it for NATO membership, if there is such an opportunity.
Well, it's a very long shot, a non-starter in fact. Even the Europeans realize this, but Zelensky is pushing his luck. He has made one more demand: security guarantees from the United States. After a peace deal with Russia, he wants US forces to protect Ukraine. That is the ask from Zelensky. In return, he will agree to a mineral deal with Donald Trump.
If you believe that the economic deal is a part of the security guarantees, then why can there not be your boots on the ground, where you have your business interests? Isn't it logical? To me it seems logical, it seems to me so. I said that to the United States, but we did not discuss it yet as we did not receive their response.
Zelensky was responding to Trump's $500 billion demand. The US president wants Ukraine to give up half of its natural resources. He claims Ukraine owes $500 billion to the US. This is for the military and financial support that America has given them so far. The fact is, America gave $120 billion, $120 billion, but Trump wants $500 billion in return. This essentially is the minerals agreement. US officials say the talks are on and they're close to signing a deal, but reports from the US press suggests otherwise. Apparently, Kyiv has received multiple drafts of the minerals agreement, and he has rejected all of them because Ukraine insists on US security guarantees, and that clause was missing from the American proposals. So it was rejected. So Zelensky is playing hardball. But is he really in a position to make such demands? UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer believes Ukraine is not powerless.
In this crucial moment, as talks begin, we must work together to shape the outcome. Russia does not hold all the cards in this war because the Ukrainians have the courage to defend their country, because Russia's economy is in trouble, and because they have now lost the best of their land forces and their Black Sea fleet in this pointless invasion.
Starmer and Macron are set to meet Trump this week. The French president is in Washington today. The UK Prime Minister will meet Trump on Thursday. Both Macron and Starmer are leading Europe's response to the Ukraine crisis. On the 6th of March, the EU has called an emergency summit. This will be held in Brussels. And what will they discuss? The next steps for Ukraine and Europe's security. Today, European leaders pledged more aid to Kyiv. They also promised faster deliveries of weapons. Meanwhile, China is rallying around Vladimir Putin. Today, the Russian president spoke with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Xi told Putin that China and Russia are true friends who support each other. In fact, let me quote from what he said: Russia and China are good neighbors that cannot be moved apart. He could be hinting at the recent moves by the US and by President Trump in particular. You see, China wants a slice of all the action. It wants to have a say in the Ukraine peace process. It does not want to be watching from the sidelines. And Putin is cognizant of that. He is said to have briefed Xi Jinping on the discussions with the US. And frankly, it's a dramatic turn of fortunes for the Russian president. A few months ago, the West was gunning for him. Joe Biden tried to turn Putin into a global pariah. He obviously failed. Now Biden is out of office and Putin is pretty much having his way.
I have made the decision of a military operation.
Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly.
Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
There are many kinds of politicians. You've got the cautious bunch, the wise statesman type, and of course the risk takers. No prizes for guessing which kind Vladimir Putin is. He is a risk taker. He saw that in Syria. We saw that in Syria where he turned the tide of the civil war. In Georgia, where he fired the first shot at NATO. In Crimea, where he fired the second. And finally in Ukraine. At first, it looked like Putin had miscalculated. Joe Biden was eager to defend Ukraine. Europe closed ranks behind him. And NATO found a new purpose. But Putin was playing the long game. He made some crucial assumptions and moves leading up to the war. And 3 years later, it looks like they paid off. Our special report tells you how. It was supposed to be just a normal Thursday. Delhi was a lot colder than it is now, but we were all looking forward to the weekend. And then a bomb dropped, quite literally. Just an hour before dawn, Russian missiles lit up Ukrainian skies. At first, they hit the military sites in places that have since become household names for us, like Odessa, Mariupol, Kharkiv, and Dnipro. Our first reaction was shock. A war in 2022? Surely no one was that delusional. But for Vladimir Putin, the decision did not seem unusual. He felt that he had been boxed in, that he had no choice but to invade.
I have made the decision of a military operation. Whoever tries to interfere with us, and even more so to create threats for our country, our people should know that Russia's response will be immediate.
A special military operation. That's what he called and still calls the war in Ukraine. And a lot of people mocked it at first. But after seeing a real war in Gaza, maybe they agree. Putin described 3 goals in Ukraine: denazification, demilitarization, and neutral status. His position was very clear. Russia will not accept a NATO neighbor. Ukraine must remain out of Western military alliances. In the first days of the war, Russia made rapid progress. They made it very close to the capital, Kyiv. People wondered where the Ukrainian leadership had gone. They finally emerged in this selfie video, the first of many that Volodymyr Zelensky would post from the streets of Kyiv. He ditched his suit once the attack began, and since then we've only seen him in these military fatigues. The change of wardrobe made one thing quite clear: Zelensky wanted to fight. He was in no mood to sue for peace. In Europe and North America, the sentiment was the same. Joe Biden saw this as an opportunity. He was desperate to show Europe that he was not like his predecessor, that he was not a Donald Trump. So Biden plunged himself and NATO into defending Ukraine.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Putin. Putin may be able to take a city, but he'll never be able to hold the country. So we're going to continue to support the brave Ukrainian people as they fight for their country.
The West said Russia would lose, that sanctions would strangle its economy, that NATO support would push Russia back. Well, none of that has happened. Instead, it's Ukraine that is on the verge of defeat. So how did Putin pull it off? And was he right all along? The Western strategy was based on 3 ideas, or rather 3 very ambitious assumptions. 1, that Russia's economy would collapse. 2, that NATO military support could hold Russia off. And 3, that Putin would be isolated. Again, none of that has happened. Russia's economy has beaten the G7. In the ongoing fiscal year, their GDP is expected to grow by 4%. And the G7 nations, just 1.7%. Their currency is also relatively stable. I'm talking about the ruble, the same ruble that Biden promised to turn into rubble.
As a result of these unprecedented sanctions, the ruble almost is immediately reduced to rubble.
Well, status check. $1 was 85 rubles when the war began. It is 88 last we checked. So certainly not rubble. Militarily, Russia has done enough to gain the edge. Early assessments indicated a blitzkrieg, but 3 years on, it's a war of attrition. Both sides are digging in. Nonetheless, Russia controls almost 20% of Ukraine. They have moved slowly, but surely. And finally, the political isolation. Just look at these pictures since 2022. If that is isolation, I'm sure every leader wants a bit of it. Putin has expanded his ties everywhere except the West. He hosted African leaders in Moscow. He deepened his friendship with China's Xi Jinping. He found a new buddy in Kim Jong-un, and he retained India's partnership despite Western pressure. So fewer friends maybe, but isolated? Far from it. Which brings us back to our question. How did Putin pull it off? He did 3 things right. 1, he made sure that Ukraine and the West had no military path to success, meaning they could not win on the battlefield. Occasionally, Putin would stir the nuclear pot. He would hold drills with nuclear weapons, put his nuke responses on alert, and this spooked Western powers. They backed away from giving long-range weapons to Ukraine. They told Zelensky, defend, do not attack. In late 2024, they finally changed their position. They allowed Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia, but by then it was too late. Russia already had the upper hand. So Putin's nuclear rhetoric had a very clear objective: to keep Western support to a minimum. And this ensured that there would be only 2 outcomes in this war: either a Russian military victory or a negotiated settlement. The possibility of a Ukrainian military victory was removed. It's like a cricket team batting long in a test match. The idea is not always to win. It is to ensure that the other side can only draw or lose. The second thing that Putin did right was handling the economy. Russia is under some 24,000 sanctions, 24,000. Yet the economy is stable. When the West ditched him, Putin turned east. He began selling oil to India and China. He also marketed Russian weapons to the global south, which kept his treasury full. Putin also invested in the BRICS. This used to be an alliance of 5 nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, 5 countries. But after the war, it has expanded. Today, the BRICS has 10 members, and together they're looking to upend the global order, maybe create alternatives to the Western system. And finally, the third thing that Putin did right: he did not pitch this war as some good versus evil fight. He was very clear: this is strategic for me. I have some demands and concerns. I'm ready to talk. If you agree to them, I will end the war. Which is what's happening right now. The West categorically rejected diplomacy with Vladimir Putin, but Putin did not rule it out. He never did it. He always kept the door open for talks, almost betting that some interesting party would eventually come in. And that party was Donald Trump.
I think that President Putin and President Zelensky are going to have to get together because, you know what, we want to stop killing millions of people.
So to put it simply, Putin played the long game. He was not in any hurry to take Kyiv and plant the Russian flag there. In fact, you have to wonder if he ever wanted to occupy the whole country or whether he just wanted to break up Ukraine. So instead of rushing, Putin waited. He watched as the energy prices spiraled out of control, as wheat and fertilizer supplies shrank, as inflation skyrocketed, as political opposition built in the West, as Donald Trump launched his campaign, as incumbent Western leaders faced abysmal approvals, as the far right surged in Europe, and as Trump retook the White House. It was a masterclass in strategic patience. But at the heart of it, it was a simple principle. Who wanted it more? Did Putin want a neutral Ukraine more than the West wanted a NATO Ukraine? That was the question. Putin bet early on that the answer was yes, that he wanted a neutral Ukraine more. So, of course, a peace deal has not been struck yet. But as things stand, 3 years later, it looks like Vladimir Putin is having the last laugh, that his risky bet has paid off. And he's not done yet. He has a number of options to choose from. He could push Trump for more concessions, he could stretch out the talks to gain more land on the battlefield, or he could risk another gamble. I mean, Trump has already shown his hand. He wants to end this war ASAP. But if he cannot strike a deal, what will he do? Will he cut off military aid anyway? If he does, Putin could triumph on the battlefield. I'm not saying he'll do that. I'm saying that he has the option of doing that. And don't forget the broader realignment. Until now, Europe depended on the US for security, but Trump is removing that umbrella. He says Europe should take the lead in defending itself. It's a position that is catching on in America. This is a country with a history of isolationism. So it's not surprising that Americans want to stay out of Europe, which is again advantage Putin. An isolationist US means a weaker NATO. A weaker NATO means weak transatlantic ties, and weak transatlantic ties is good news for Vladimir Putin. He can assert his influence more freely. So all in all, it's a good time to be in the Kremlin. Things are shaping up nicely for Putin. Having said that, let's not forget a few things. One, it is easy for Putin to deploy strategic patience. He doesn't have to worry about voters turning against him, or worse, voting him out. That security allows him to wait the bad times out, a luxury that democratic leaders do not have. Secondly, Putin was right in his assessment. That doesn't mean that his actions were also right. Waging war is not acceptable. Ukraine is a sovereign country that can make its own choices. Russia cannot dictate terms to them. Yes, it is true that Zelensky played hardball, but war cannot be the answer. And finally, Putin's focus on Ukraine may have cost him elsewhere. His ally Bashar al-Assad was toppled in Syria, mainly because Russian air support was missing. Plus, he's got 2 new NATO members on his doorstep now, Finland and Sweden. Both countries were neutral, but after Russia's invasion, they've joined NATO. This once again shows how complex geopolitics is. A win is never absolute, and a loss is not always complete failure. It's a question of maximizing what is good for you and minimizing the negative fallouts. In Ukraine, Putin has done the former. He has maximized his gains. Meanwhile, the West is scrambling to do damage control. If this was a card game, Putin would have the best hand. His trump card? Donald Trump himself. The US president seems to be on Putin's side. He's been praising the Russian leader, repeating Moscow's talking points and hinting at a summit. Listen in.
I've had very good talks with Putin, and I've had not such good talks with Ukraine. They don't have any cards, but they play it tough. But we're not going to let this continue. This war is terrible. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast, because...
All that in just 30 days. It makes you wonder, why does Trump like Putin so much? Is it just politics? Is it ideological? Or is there something sinister here? First, some context. Trump and Putin have always shared warm ties. In the 2016 campaign, Trump praised Putin. When he won, Putin was among the first leaders to congratulate him. In office, that equation continued. Both leaders met in 2018 for a summit. It came in the backdrop of Russian meddling claims. The FBI said Moscow had interfered in the 2016 US election. But after meeting Putin, Trump rejected that. In other words, he sided with Putin over his own intelligence agencies.
All I can do is ask the question. My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, but I really do want to see the server.
So the warmth is not new. The question is why? There are 6 main theories around it, around why Donald Trump likes Vladimir Putin. These are theories. Number 1, that Trump colluded with Russia, that Putin meddled on Trump's behalf in 2016. Now, this angle was investigated by the FBI and the US Justice Department, and that too for almost 2 years. And what did they find? Nothing. No evidence of collusion. These probes were criticized in later reports. They said the FBI acted in haste. Either way, no evidence of Russian meddling. Theory number 2, that Putin has dirt on Donald Trump, basically some sort of compromising material. This became all the rage in 2017. A former British spy published a dossier on Trump's alleged links to Moscow. And guess who hired this former spy? Trump's opponent, Hillary Clinton. The dossier was later proven to be fake, yet the allegations have not stopped. Theory number 3, Trump is obsessed with strongmen. As weird as it sounds, it fits a pattern. Trump has cultivated good equations with authoritarian leaders like Xi Jinping of China, Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and of course, Vladimir Putin of Russia. Trump himself has shown autocratic streaks, so maybe he admires people with the same qualities. Theory number 4, Trump is not a cold warrior. Now, the Cold War was a titanic tussle of the 20th century, the United States versus the Soviet Union, capitalism versus communism. This conflict created distrust towards Moscow in the US, and it continued even after the Cold War ended. Many senior US politicians lived through this period. They rose through the ranks during the Cold War, so their default policy was anti-Russia. Now, Donald Trump is the same age as them. But he was not a politician during the Cold War, he was a businessman. So his approach to Russia is not colored by history. Theory number 5, Trump is a realist. He understands what is possible and what is not. Russia is a $2 trillion economy. It has the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet. It is also the biggest country by size. So you cannot work on global problems without Russia, whether it's arms control or climate change or supply chain resilience or energy security. Without Russia, you cannot address these challenges. Which brings us to the final theory. Trump has business interests in Russia. Now, this theory was peddled by his former lawyer as well. His name is Michael Cohen. Cohen says Trump did not expect to win the 2016 election, so he tried to make the most of the campaign. How? By praising Putin to secure Russian funds. Trump had sent Cohen to discuss real estate deals. His plan was to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, that too with a free penthouse for Putin. I know all these theories sound plausible. They also sound like a juicy bit of gossip, but chances are it's not as scandalous or explosive. Putin may have problems at home, but abroad he has gotten along with most leaders. In the Arab world, no problems. In Asia, no problems. In Africa, same. And even in Europe, he has done quite well. Putin was very close to former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder. Putin took him on a sleigh ride during Christmas. He even visited Schröder's home on his 60th birthday. Same with former French President Nicolas Sarkozy. He visited Moscow even after leaving office. In 2023, he defended Putin's invasion, which is clearly a sign of close ties. Another example is Italy's former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. He partied and hunted with Putin. So my point is simple. The Russian president may be rough around the edges, but he gets along with most people and gets along well. In that sense, Trump is not the exception here. He is the norm. The election is over, the verdict is in, the Conservatives have won. They will form the next government in Germany. What does it mean for the country and the region? Who are the biggest winners and losers? And who will be Germany's next chancellor? Tonight we will break it down for you, starting with this. Germany's electoral map. Each color represents the party that won in different regions. And this map shows an unmistakable divide. West Germany is a sea of black, dominated by the CDU or the Christian Democratic Union. East Germany is painted blue, swept by the AfD or the Alternative for Germany party. Now, this is a clear political fault line. West Germany voted the Conservatives, East Germany turned to the far right. If you looked at this map with no context, you'd think the Berlin Wall never fell. And that tells you everything about this election. Germany is divided. It shows in the results. Now let's take a look at the big winners and losers. The biggest winner, of course, is the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union. They secured 28.5% of the total vote. Their goal was 30%. They fell short, but they came out on top. Their priority now is forming the government, for which they will need an ally, and that ally will most likely be the Social Democrats. That's the outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz's party. So the next government in Germany will be a two-party coalition. By German standards, that's remarkably stable.
Together with the mandates of the Social Democrats, which account for 120 members of parliament, we are naturally capable of forming a government with 328 seats out of 630, a black-red coalition, and that is exactly what we want.
So who will lead this government? The leader of the Christian Democrats, Friedrich Merz. He is set to become the next chancellor. Born in 1955, Merz is not just a politician, he is a trained lawyer and a licensed pilot. His political career took off in 1989. That's when he was elected to the European Parliament. Soon after that, he entered the Bundestag, which is the German parliament. His rise through the CDU ranks was swift, but his luck ran out in the early 2000s. That's when Angela Merkel sidelined him. She was in the same party, the CDU, and she went on to rule Germany for a good 16 years. So Merz walked away from politics. He joined the private sector. He made millions and never held a government post. But he also did not let go of his dream to be chancellor. And now, 2 decades later, his dream is finally coming true. Which brings us to the other big winner, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany party. They won 20.8% of the vote, and this is a remarkable rise. This party was formed in 2013. It's only 12 years old. And in 12 years, they've become Germany's second biggest political force. Also, they've doubled their numbers since 2021. That's when Germany's last elections were held, 2021. The AfD got 10.4% of the votes back then, and now they're at 20.85%. The AfD is classified as a far-right party. Some of its members are called extremists. They've gotten into trouble for using Nazi-era symbols. Yet, in former communist East Germany, AfD is the biggest party. And it's because of many reasons. AfD talks tough on immigration. It raises the problem of inflation. All this has earned them a loyal voter base. It uses TikTok to reach the youth. Plus, the AfD has a powerful backer in Elon Musk. All these factors have boosted its position, but it won't be able to stake claim in the government. Leading this party, the AfD, is Alice Weidel. She is from West Germany. She is an openly gay politician. Her partner is a Sri Lankan-born German. The couple has 2 children. And this makes her an unusual choice to run AfD. Yet many believe Weidel is the party's balancing act. She makes AfD look more moderate. And she's quite pleased with the results. In fact, she already has her eyes set on the next election.
I personally am very happy. We as party leaders are very happy. We have been able to form a very good platform here, a strategic platform that has the best prerequisites to overtake the CDU within the next few years for the next election. In other words, to become the strongest force and to take the government mandate for the next federal elections with us.
Now let's talk about the biggest losers. Topping the list is Olaf Scholz and his Social Democratic Party. It was their worst election result in over a century. Scholz says he will not serve in the next government. He is stepping back for the party.
The election result was better last time, and I was responsible for that. This time, the election result is bad, and I would like to take this opportunity to say that I am also responsible for this election result.
So what's next for Germany's future? Merz has some big challenges ahead. The first, of course, is immigration. Merz says that his first job is to close Germany's borders. No undocumented immigrants will be allowed, not only in Germany. He wants tougher rules for all of the European Union. He wants immigration reform for the entire bloc. That's one issue that he has to deal with. Then we have the economy. Germany is the world's third biggest economy and Europe's biggest. But for the second year in a row, it is in recession. Energy prices are at a record high. There are massive labor shortages. So Merz wants to rebuild Germany by improving infrastructure and slashing the red tape. Which brings us to his last big problem, Donald Trump. America has long been Germany's bedrock ally, but that equation has changed with Trump's outreach to Russia. His statements about Europe's security and his berating of Germany. This has angered the Germans. So the next chancellor has vowed independence from the US. He has promised to build European security, and he believes that NATO could be dead soon.
Spätestens.
With Donald Trump's comments on Zelensky and Ukraine, it has been clear what is happening here. The trench in the Atlantic is getting deeper, and the question of whether or not we, the Federal Republic of Germany, can still celebrate 70 years of NATO with the Americans in a carefree manner has not been answered.
So where does Germany go from here? Friedrich Merz takes the helm at a time of deep division, a fractured electorate, a stagnant economy, and a shifting geopolitical landscape. His government will have to act fast to cement Germany's place in a changing world order. Now let's turn to West Asia, which is once again on the brink of war. Israel's war in Gaza has been on hold for a little over a month. There's been a ceasefire in place. Hamas has been releasing Israeli hostages. Israel has been freeing Palestinian prisoners. That's been the case for the last month. But on Saturday, Israel did not hold up its end of the bargain. Hamas released 6 hostages. Israel was supposed to free over 600 prisoners, but Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delayed their release. He objected to the way Hamas was treating the hostages, making a spectacle of them. So Netanyahu is withholding the Palestinians. But if Hamas tries to scrap the ceasefire altogether, Netanyahu has a warning. He says plans to resume the Gaza war are ready. Here's our report.
The Gaza ceasefire has been in place for a little over a month. There have been almost 8 rounds of prisoner exchanges. A 9th round is scheduled for this week. Hamas has been releasing Israeli hostages. They have released some bodies as well. These were mostly people captured by the group on October 7th, 2023. Meanwhile, Israel has freed hundreds of Palestinians that it had detained. The last exchange was to take place on Saturday. Hamas released 6 hostages. Israel was supposed to release over 600 Palestinians, but it did not. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delayed the release. He objected to how Hamas was releasing hostages. Hamas has been holding hostage release ceremonies. It has brought other hostages to these people it isn't freeing yet, just to make them watch the spectacle. Netanyahu has called all this degrading. The next exchange is set for Thursday. Hamas is supposed to release 4 hostage bodies. Netanyahu says he will only release the 600-odd prisoners after that, and only if Hamas puts an end to these ceremonies. However, withholding the prisoners wasn't Netanyahu's only threat.
We are ready to return to intense fighting in Gaza at any moment. The operational plans are ready.
Netanyahu says that Hamas has to adhere to the ceasefire, despite the delayed prisoner release, or Israel will resume the war. Hamas has accused Netanyahu of sabotaging the ceasefire deal. The group says it won't negotiate any further, not until the prisoners are released as promised. This puts the future of the ceasefire in doubt. About 60 hostages are still with Hamas. They are reportedly all men, between the ages of 20 and 50. They were to be freed in Phase 2. It was scheduled to begin in March. Hamas says Netanyahu is undermining this plan. Israeli citizens have mixed reactions to Netanyahu's strategy.
To my difficulty, I'm a very honest person, so if Israel agreed to something, it's hard for me if they do anything that isn't in keeping with the agreement. But this situation with these ceremonies is sickening.
I think Hamas needs to be put in place a bit. I think we need the upper hand, and I think we're doing what we can. I think, holding the prisoners is a way of flexing a muscle. I do think, though, that we're really playing with fire. It's really, who's to say what's the right move right now?
Meanwhile, Israel seems to be flexing its muscles on the other side as well, in the West Bank. After 22 years, Israeli tanks are once again rolling through the Palestinian territory. Israel says that the tanks and troops are there for the long haul, at least a year. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have been evicted from the West Bank. And Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, says they won't be allowed to return. Israel is putting pressure on all Palestinians. Will Hamas buckle under this pressure? Will the people of the West Bank accept the new status quo? Or will all of this just lead to another round of fighting and the perpetuation of an endless cycle of violence?
Now let's turn to Pakistan, and no, we won't be talking about cricket. India said enough on the pitch during yesterday's Champions Trophy match. So instead, we are going to focus on Pakistan's Prime Minister, formerly known as Shehbaz Sharif. I say formerly known because it seems he has decided to sacrifice his name. He gave it away in a foolhardy bet. Take a look at this.
ਅਸੀਂ ਇਨਸ਼ਾਅੱਲਾ ਉਸ ਰੱਬ ਨੂੰ ਮਨਜ਼ੂਰ ਹੈ, ਰੱਬ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਨੂੰ ਮਨਜ਼ੂਰ ਹੈ, ਉਸ ਰੱਬ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਨੂੰ ਮਨਜ਼ੂਰ ਹੋਇਆ ਤੇ ਇਨਸ਼ਾਅੱਲਾ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਰਾਤ ਦਿਨ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ तो एक दिन आएगा कि हिंदुस्तान ਨੂੰ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਨਾ ਛੱਡੇ ਤੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਨਾਮ ਸ਼ਹਿਬਾਜ਼ ਸ਼ਰੀਫ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਮੇਰਾ ਨਾਮ ਸ਼ਹਿਬਾਜ਼ ਸ਼ਰੀਫ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ.
Look at that. He got so excited that he bet away his name. Because let's face it, the Pakistani Prime Minister is 73 years old. He won't be around forever. So even if a miracle takes place, even if Pakistan suddenly becomes a global growth engine, unlikely, but let's imagine for a second, even if the unthinkable were to happen, the country will not surpass India economically, not in the Prime Minister's lifetime. So we might as well go ahead and come up with a new name for him. I'm sure a lot of netizens have already made some suggestions. Now, some of you might wonder why I'm so confident. Why am I writing Pakistan off already? This is not about national pride or jingoism. Let's look at the cold, hard facts here. How would you compare any two economies? The GDP, gross domestic product, is not really a fair metric. Bigger countries with more resources will almost always come out ahead, and India is much bigger than Pakistan. If we really want to compare, we should delve deeper. Look at GDP per capita, average wealth per person. Let's look at how India and Pakistan compare here. If we look at data going back to the 1960s, you can see that India and Pakistan were initially neck and neck. Both started off extremely poor and both grew slowly. In fact, there were times in the past that the average Pakistani citizen was richer than the average Indian. That's unthinkable today, but it did happen. But the switch flipped in the 2000s, around 2005, right in the middle of Pervez Musharraf's autocratic reign. India was attracting global investments, the IT sector was booming, and the country was seeing almost double-digit growth. Pakistan's growth stalled, though. The Musharraf regime was focused on promoting terrorism instead of progress, and Pakistan fell behind, and the gulf has been widening since. Let's look at the present GDP per capita in India in 2024. India's was about $2,700 per person, which is nothing to be proud of. It is horrible when compared to developed nations, but it's about 70% more than Pakistan's, and that is a massive gulf. And it has been 20 years in the making. Pakistan would need a miracle to reverse this. Not only would it need to grow unbelievably fast, it would also need India to go through a decline like it did, which is not happening. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, predicts that India will grow at 6.5% this year, and Pakistan, 3.2%. That means the gulf is set to get even wider. Now, all this data demonstrates one thing, that the man formerly known as Shehbaz Sharif has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. Pakistan has a lot to do to catch up with India, let alone surpass the country, and this won't be possible with the way Pakistan is currently run. After all, the now nameless Prime Minister was a PM only in name. Pakistan is still run by their military. It is not as overt as during Musharraf's time, but behind the scenes, it's still the same. Unless Pakistan changes this fundamental flaw, it will never improve. If you disagree, feel free to wager your name. Now let's look at another one of India's neighbors, Bangladesh. As you know, the country is seeing an upheaval. Last August, Bangladesh got rid of its long-serving Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Widespread protests led to her ouster, and the victorious demonstrators replaced her with an interim government. What has been the result? Violence, chaos, and a surge in crime. There was an attack on a Bangladeshi airbase today. One person was killed and several were injured. Meanwhile, there was a march in the capital, Dhaka, to protest against rising incidents of rape. There are also reports of widespread muggings last night. Everywhere you look, law and order seem non-existent. And what is Bangladesh's interim government doing about all of this? Not much, apparently. They usually just pin the blame on India to escape any real accountability. Our next report has the details.
A Bangladeshi Air Force base has been attacked. No, it wasn't some act of war. The attack has been blamed on miscreants. It started with a man being detained for driving a motorcycle without proper papers. This little spat escalated. 200 people stormed the airbase, and Air Force personnel were reportedly forced to open fire on them. Let's take a step back and think about that. In what functioning democracy do 200 random people attack an airbase? That too over some man driving without a license. Does this seem normal to you? Well, apparently this is the new normal in Bangladesh. And it wasn't even the biggest headline there today. Police block an anti-rape march. This was in Dhaka again today. People were protesting against the rise in rape cases in the country. They were demanding the resignation of the Home Advisor. Bangladesh doesn't have an elected government right now, not since they ousted former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. So instead of a Home Minister, they have a Home Advisor. And it seems his advice is pretty terrible, because a crime spree is underway in Bangladesh. And what has been the interim government's response to all of this? Outright denial. They say the law and order situation is satisfactory. But in case this statement doesn't convince people, Bangladesh's interim government has a backup plan. The same tactic it has been employing over the last few months. When in a pinch, pick a fight with India. And true to form, we got this today. Bangladesh's foreign advisor complaining about India once again, saying that the safety of minorities in Bangladesh isn't New Delhi's concern. The timing is impeccable. It allows the interim government to sweep the crime wave under the carpet and shift the public's focus back to India. The question is, how long will the ordinary people of Bangladesh continue to buy this? How long will they keep accepting their unelected interim government's excuses? India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, recently addressed this hypocrisy. He said, they have to make up their minds on what kind of relationship they want to have with us going ahead. If officials from the interim government continue to blame India for all their issues, some of which are completely baseless, it creates a conflicting message. On one hand, they claim to seek good relations with us, yet on the other, they repeatedly blame India for all their domestic problems. This is a choice they need to make. Bangladesh's interim government clearly isn't doing its job, but it's in no hurry to give up power either. It has delayed holding elections to 2026 now. Bangladesh will be better served if its government gets its house in order instead of blaming its neighbour for its self-inflicted problems.
Now let's talk about Indonesia. It is back in the news for its economic policies. Last year, Indonesia banned new iPhones simply because Apple was not stepping up investments in the country. And now their president, Prabowo Subianto, has taken another bold step. He has launched Indonesia's second sovereign wealth fund. But this move is not proving to be as popular as the iPhone ban. First, let's tell you about the fund. It is called Danantara. It loosely means Indonesia's future power. Danantara has a bold mandate. It will manage assets worth $900 billion. This includes both state-owned enterprises and projects in the private sector. The scope of this fund is to invest in strategic sectors, areas like nickel, bauxite and copper processing, the development of oil refineries, renewables, artificial intelligence development and food production. Basically, sectors which are critical to Indonesia's economy. The fund will invest money in all of them. President Subianto says the fund is an instrument for national development.
My administration secured over $20 billion in savings, funds that were once trapped in inefficiency, corruption, misallocation, but will now be channeled into 20 high-impact national projects, creating real long-term benefits for our people. This is a new initiative, unprecedented in our history. Today, all Indonesians can be proud to learn that with total assets of more than $900 billion under management, Danantara Indonesia will be one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds.
Subianto is aiming high. Indonesia's economy is growing at 5% today. He wants to raise this to 8%. The president wants Indonesia to become a developed nation by 2045. He calls his economic vision Golden Indonesia. And this is going to take some bold moves. By banning iPhones, Subianto has shown that he has the appetite for taking tough decisions. But not all of his policies are being cheered. Last week, major cities of Indonesia witnessed demonstrations. Hundreds of students took to the streets. They were protesting against his economic policies.
The first demand is to get rid of the president's order on budget efficiency. Second, we refuse a national strategic project that doesn't orient for the people. Third is to evaluate the free meals program. Fourth, we refuse the energy and mineral laws. Fifth, we demand free education.
As we can see, the nation is no longer serving and protecting its people. And we know the government is becoming our boss, the boss to the people of Indonesia. Also, the misuse of the law enforcement of police and military personnel being repressive is now seen clearly in many areas.
So the list of complaints is long, and this is not their first protest. It is turning into a bit of a movement. They're calling it Dark Indonesia. The name is a play on Subianto's Golden Indonesia plan and a jab at some of his most controversial policies, like the government budget cuts. Subianto has ordered extreme austerity measures. Government officials are taking drastic steps. One of them involves cutting the use of electricity in ministries. Office lights have to be switched off and air conditioners stop working after 4 p.m. Lifts are out of service. Civil servants are being forced to pay for their cabs when they go for meetings. Why are they being forced to do all of this? Because the government wants to save $19 billion, and to meet this goal, ministerial budgets have been slashed. Spending on travel, consultants, training and stationery is being reduced. Indonesia's Public Works Ministry is among the hardest hit. Their budget was cut by 80%. This ministry oversees government infrastructure projects. Funding for essential needs like maintenance of roads and bridges has also been cut. President Subianto is on a serious cost-cutting drive because he needs money to fund some of his election promises, like giving free meals to Indonesians. Subianto plans to spend $28 billion every year on this program. It will reach 82 million people every day. But he doesn't have the money to do it. Hence the budget cuts. To fund the free meals program. This approach has angered young Indonesians. It has hit government scholarship schemes, so they are protesting. The president has refused to give in so far. He says the budget cuts will remain. And it has not dented his popularity yet. Around 80% Indonesians still approve of his leadership. But he cannot afford to ignore the anger. Leaders across the world have lost power due to economic issues, stuff like rising costs and lack of jobs. This has precipitated the downfall of many. Indonesia is facing similar challenges, and Subianto is walking a tightrope. Let's turn to India now, which is grappling with a tough question. Did USAID meddle in our elections or not? Last week, US President Donald Trump hinted at it, but days later, there is no clarity. Over the weekend, Foreign Minister Jaishankar spoke about it. He said USAID was allowed in India under good faith, but recent claims warrant a look.
USAID was allowed, has been here historically, but USAID was allowed here in good faith, to do good faith activities. Now, suggestions are being made out of America that there are activities which are in bad faith. So, it surely warrants a look. And if there is something to it, I think the country should know who are the people involved in the bad faith activities.
Well, the Finance Ministry has the details now. It says 7 USAID-linked projects are being implemented. Their total budget is $750 million. Out of this, USAID has committed $97 million. And do they cover voting? According to this report, no. They covered issues like food security, health and sanitation. Now, don't celebrate yet. This report only covers the last financial year. What we need is a deep dive, a full audit of where USAID spent its money. And we need to move fast because Trump is gutting the whole agency. He has fired 2,000 USAID employees and those remaining have been put on leave. I know a lot of people are cheering this move. And we also know why. USAID has a history of meddling abroad. In Hungary, in Cuba, in Iran, in Brazil, and in Bolivia, these countries have called out USAID. They have accused it of meddling. Some American politicians have openly admitted it, like former Secretary of State John Kerry. Listen to what he said. This was in 2013. John Kerry said, and I'm quoting, "Foreign assistance is not a giveaway. It is not charity. It is an investment in a strong America and free world." Now, just to be clear, by free world, he means American freedom. Coca-Cola with a side of Lockheed Martin. All this meddling has turned the world against USAID. They see it as an assault on their freedom. So when Trump dismantles it, they cheer him on. But here's the truth. Trump is using domestic politics to duck America's global commitments. On that, we agree with John Kerry. Foreign assistance is not charity. America owes it to the world. The Americans have invaded or bombed 29 countries. That is 1/3 of the world. Some of those countries were already teetering. The US reduced them to rubble. Think about Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam. These countries bore the brunt of American freedom projects, especially after 9/11. After that attack, America started what it called the War on Terror, the global war on terror. It was a global operation. You had invasions, drone strikes, proxy wars, carpet bombing. The final death toll? According to one report, 4.5 million people. 4.5 million people. That's how many people died in American wars after 9/11. Does the US not have a responsibility to those countries, to those surviving families? I would say they do. Just consider the nation of Laos. In the 1960s and 70s, the US tried to topple their communist regime. How? By bombing them into the Stone Age. America dropped 2 million tons of bombs on Laos. That's more than they dropped on Nazi Germany. In fact, Laos is the most bombed country on earth. And guess what? Donald Trump has paused USAID operations in Laos. Same in Iraq. USAID was leading the reconstruction project in Iran. But if Trump guts it, who knows? Maybe the reconstruction will stop. So it is important to understand the risks here. USAID ran projects in 130 countries. Millions of lives depended on it. You cannot just dismantle such an agency overnight. Did it have problems? Yes, it did. But you cannot use this as an excuse to skirt your responsibilities, to fix the mess that you created. The solution is not to delete. The solution is to reform both the ideology and the purpose. USAID was created way back in 1961. We are talking about peak Cold War period. So the objective of USAID was to weaponize assistance, to use aid to contain communism. The Cold War ended, but that legacy did not. So when you cheer USAID's demise, keep this in mind. American meddling will return in some different form. If not aid, then something else. But American assistance will not return. Once you let them off the hook, it's over. It's Monday, the start of a new week. You drag yourself into the office, still mourning the weekend. But instead of your morning coffee, the first thing you see is an email from HR. List 5 accomplishments from last week, or consider this your resignation. How would that feel? Well, 2.3 million US federal workers do not have to imagine it. Over the weekend, they got that very email straight from Elon Musk's Doge. 5 bullet points. If there's no response, you're out. But not everyone is playing along. Agencies like the FBI and the Pentagon are pushing back. Our next report tells you more.
Imagine this. You walk into your office, fire up your government-issued laptop, praying for a quiet week. But the first thing blinking in your mailbox is an absurd demand. The sender is listed as HR. The mail asks, what did you do last week? List your accomplishments. Non-response equals resignation. At first, you think it's spam, even a phishing attempt. But it turns out it's all as real as it gets. This was the reality for 2.3 million US federal workers over the weekend. The mail was the brainchild of Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency. It asked federal workers to list 5 accomplishments, 5 things they did last week. Musk said not replying meant termination, because nothing fosters productivity like existential panic. The White House says it's all part of the streamlining process.
We want to streamline our country. We want to streamline, because you know why? Because we want our country to survive and thrive. And we're finding billions and billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse. Billions. And I mean numbers like you wouldn't believe. And we haven't even started yet.
It's rich to see Musk demanding efficiency from others. Can he list 5 things he did last week, or even in the last few months? Well, we can think of some. Tanked Tesla stock with a tweet, called someone woke on X, launched a Cybertruck that barely functioned, asked employees to work ultra-hardcore, declared himself an expert on everything. And there's a lot more. However, the world's richest micromanager wants efficiency from everyone else. But not all departments are complying. Several agencies are pushing back. The likes of the FBI, the US State Department, the Pentagon, and the Intelligence Department. They've instructed employees to not answer. The newly appointed Kash Patel has told employees not to bother. He says that the Bureau will handle all responses. The State Department has given the same directive too. And here's the kicker. Streamlining isn't a bad idea, especially for a government as big as that in the United States. It is the biggest employer in the country, but this isn't the way to go about it. If Musk actually wanted productivity, this move was the worst way to get it. The second you force employees into performative accountability, they stop working and start covering their bases. The 5 accomplishments email didn't drive efficiency, it triggered a bureaucratic sprint. Not to run the country better, but to prove they were running at all. And what did Musk accomplish? Except for disruption, he managed to unite the federal workforce. They may not have a lot in common, but at least there's mutual hatred for Musk's management style. Maybe the Tesla CEO can count that as one of his 5 accomplishments for the week.
Pakistan is hosting the Champions Trophy cricket tournament and it's going exactly as you would expect. India is not even playing in Pakistan, but the organisers are clearly missing us. Consider what happened during the England-Australia match. Both teams had lined up for the national anthem, but guess what the organisers played? Jana Gana Man, which is India's national anthem. Then on Sunday, Pakistan took the field against India. They lost quite convincingly, and cue the meme fest.
क्या है बे? अबे तो क्या समझता मुझे? हाँ
भाई आप ठीक हैं? ये मेरी प्रॉब्लम है।
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Eurofighter jets escort a Delhi-bound American Airlines flight after it was diverted to Rome due to a security threat. A US spacecraft captures a stunning view of the far side of the moon, and in Florida, an alligator stops traffic as it crosses the road with a turtle in its mouth. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1942, the Voice of America made its first broadcast in German. The VOA was established by the US government to counteract Nazi propaganda. The broadcast marked a significant moment in the Second World War. We are leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
America's hand of friendship to all.